What's going on, everybody, and welcome back into the Brenden Schaeffer Fantasy Football channel. It's been a couple of weeks since we have talked fantasy football trades, but I know a lot of folks have their trade deadlines coming up very quickly in their fantasy leagues. Some of you guys may have already had yours, so this content's not necessarily going to be for you, but for those who still can trade in their leagues, I decided to just do sort of an expedited form of the videos I was doing earlier in the year and just take a look right away at the most traded players in fantasy football. As of right now, it is Tuesday, November 14th. We're going into week 11. Let's just take a look at some of the players being traded and what we think we could get for those guys, what we think we should be willing to offer. Are we actually trying to trade some of these players away? As I need to reorient my screen a little bit here, make sure we get that cooking. I think it's an important thing to do right now in fantasy football because we're gearing up for the stretch run of the season and trying to figure out exactly what we need to be doing with our teams. And so I think now is a great time to make a couple of trades before your deadline in your league. So let's go ahead and jump right in without any further ado and take a look at some of the names being moved. We're looking at Yahoo here. You can do this at home as well. Follow along. You head to the transaction trends page and click on trades. 646 trades have been made this week involving Adam Thielen, Carolina Panthers wide receiver, and it's kind of easy to see why he would be a highly traded player right now. You had him go absolutely nuclear earlier in the season with the numbers that he was putting up for the Panthers. First year of, I believe, a 3-year contract, putting up 20, 31, 15, 27, 28 points on a weekly basis in PPR formats. A little bit quieter since the bye, but for some teams, you could say, hey, man, that's a reliable wide receiver if his bad weeks are 15, 7, and 10. Look at the target volume. It's still there. I would say that Adam Thielen would indeed be a trade for candidate right now. Look at the upcoming schedule. Certainly the Panthers should have to pass against Dallas, even though Dallas has a good secondary. I think you'll see a lot of targets for Thielen. And then the next couple of weeks, good matchups for wide receivers against Tennessee and Tampa Bay. Maybe not as much in the playoffs, but sometimes you just got to overlook those matchups, knowing that the Panthers are likely going to be trailing in a lot of their games. I think it's a reasonable place to live. So Adam Thielen, somebody that I definitely think you could be looking to acquire. But let's go ahead and take a look at what's been traded for Adam Thielen and see if we agree with the prices. It looks like we're not getting a lot on Yahoo in terms of one-for-ones. Let's take a look here. We have the first trade on the board is Adam Thielen for Garrett Wilson. I hope you guys can see that on your screen. It's a little bit small, but it works for the video. Garrett Wilson for Adam Thielen is a really interesting trade and definitely not one that you would have imagined making in a redraft league before the season. Obviously, with Aaron Rodgers in the fold, you would have expected Garrett Wilson to be a stud. And it's possible that Aaron Rodgers returns for your fantasy playoffs and does so to boost Garrett Wilson into a league winner potential. I think there's that possibility. Right now, Rodgers saying he's targeting mid-December for his return. I'm not 100% sure that's realistic, but there will still be some fantasy leagues going. That'll be playoff time. If you have any question about how much I think Rodgers is either blowing smoke or actually could be genuine with this, I do have Aaron Rodgers on one of my Superflex teams stashed on IR. So I think there's at least enough of a possibility that that's worthwhile to do, in my opinion. Adam Thielen, though, for Garrett Wilson, man, is tough. I honestly think it's a fair trade, and I can't necessarily say which side I prefer. I think Garrett's probably got more upside, but that's hard to say with the way Adam Thielen has been playing. So I guess you should base it on whether you believe Rodgers is coming back. If you think he's coming back, maybe Wilson would be a nice pickup there. If not, Adam Thielen might have the better numbers in the playoffs, and I don't think it's a crazy situation given the target volume that he gets. But Wilson's so explosive, he doesn't need target volume necessarily to go nuclear the way that Adam Thielen has been on a points-per-game basis. Taking a look at some of the other trades that are being made here, Adam Thielen alongside Michael Pittman is a trade that is happening on Yahoo. It's off your board here. Let me scroll up so we can see it. It's at the top of our screen right now. A bunch of guys being traded in that package is a Thielen plus Pittman package for Kareem Hunt, Noah Brown, Zay Flowers, and Jaden Reed. That feels like a very uneven trade. I easily prefer the Thielen-Pittman side on that. Let's try to look at a couple other deals being made that are a little bit more realistic. I don't understand what happened in that trade. Just anytime you can trade a bunch of volume for two guys that you think are plug-and plays in your lineup, you're going to want to do that. Thielen and Mostert for Algier and Jalen Warren. I certainly prefer the Thielen side in that trade. Warren's been playing well, but I think that's a sell high because he still has to mix and match with Najee Harris in Pittsburgh. Warren had a good week, like 19 PPR points. But Algier, to me, is just a handcuff for Bijan. We did finally see Arthur Smith use Bijan a little bit more. Was nice to see in Week 10. Next on the board is Adam Thielen and Saquon Barkley for Evans and Gus Edwards. Again, I find myself preferring the Thielen side. Barkley hasn't been super productive, but the volume's still going to be there. He's really the Giants' only player. And so I don't mind starting Saquon Barkley by any means. And I think Gus Edwards is going to be moving the other direction. The more Keaton Mitchell plays, the more Gus Edwards doesn't have that same level of relevance. We know that it's a week-to-week league in terms of the way the Baltimore Ravens, almost said Orioles, Ravens use their running backs, but I don't really think I have a lot of interest in Gus Edwards. Mike Evans is always going to be pretty consistent for you, but I think I even prefer Thielen there. So giving you a price check on Adam Thielen a little bit. Let's see if there's anything else that jumps out in terms of these smaller trades being made. Thielen and James Conner, who's off the IR now, had a quiet week for the Cardinals in his first week back, but that's being a package traded for Jonathan Taylor, which I think is dependent upon team need. But I kind of, as long as I've got a bunch of wide receivers, and you can think about Adam Thielen wasn't drafted super highly, so it's possible that that's somebody's wide receiver 4, and they're trading to upgrade at running back. I think that's a nice move. Jonathan Taylor, like at this point, it's kind of a little bit of a lottery. You trade for players that you think are great, and if they aren't great in weeks 15 through 17, then that's just unfortunate. But Jonathan Taylor has certainly the ability to go off any given week, and probably more so than James Conner. So I feel like that is an okay trade to make if you're getting Taylor and you have the wide receiver depth to withstand losing Adam Thielen. Moving down the list, someone's trading for Amon-Ra St. Brown, and that is a monster of a deal. Thielen, Ramondre Stevenson, Brock Purdy, and Dalton Kincaid for Amon-Ra. That's one of those deals where, I love getting the best player in the deal. I wonder what the roster looks like for the guy that gave up so much for Amon-Ra. If that's Thielen's probably on your bench, Brock Purdy's probably your second quarterback, Dalton Kincaid maybe your second tight end, and Ramondre Stevenson your RB2. I could see making that trade to upgrade your lineup, right? If you're trading a bunch of bench players and maybe one starter to upgrade that Amon-Ra spot, then you probably have done so. So it's a lot of stuff to give up, but anytime you can get Amon-Ra for the stretch run, I think is a win. Adam Thielen going with Evan Ingram and Trevor Lawrence for Kelsey. As long as Thielen wasn't super necessary to that wide receiver room, I think that's a good play. You're getting in theory, the top tight end in fantasy. Hopefully Kelsey is able to have a strong stretch run for us, as I know he's kind of getting up there in age, but he's still really the only reliable guy KC has in that pass-catching core. Thielen and Kenneth Walker for Debo and Pacheco. I think I prefer Thielen over Debo, and I think I prefer Kenneth Walker over Pacheco. Like, I'm still high on Thielen, guys. Like, Debo's a great option, but San Francisco has so many players that can score for fantasy. Carolina doesn't. They have Thielen. And I honestly feel like you're just going to get more volume there with Adam Thielen, and it's easily Walker over Pacheco for me, despite the fact that we're seeing Zach Charbonnet get more opportunity on the field. I still think Ken Walker is the talent level of a player that can just break one. Pacheco is not as explosive. Then we go down the list. We see Thielen and Metcalf for Kelsey. I think that's a fair trade. Anytime you can get Travis Kelsey to upgrade your lineup, as long as you're robust at wide receiver, I support it. Moving down even further, Thielen, Najee, Chuba, Hubbard for Jerome Ford and Puka. I definitely prefer the Thielen side there. Like, Najee is gross but startable. Same thing with Hubbard, and I put Jerome Ford in that same category. Whereas I would say Puka I really like, but I think some of the shine has wore off him a little bit, especially until we get our guy Matt Stafford back in the lineup there for the Rams, which hopefully happens this week. But I'm fine taking the Thielen side on this, but it's generally a pretty fair trade. Thielen for Diggs 1-for-1 is crazy. Maybe there's dynasty implications there. I certainly prefer Diggs if you're able to pull that off. At the height of Adam Thielen, you probably could have done that trade, and I would say, hey, nice move buying low on Stephon Diggs, but Thielen's kind of gone down a little bit, so I'm surprised to see that move. Thielen and Pollard for Achane. Woo! And Cleveland defense is involved in that as well, but Achane certainly I like better right now than Pollard. It's just not happening for him. He's not scoring touchdowns. I'm hoping he gets one on Thanksgiving, but it's pretty bad that he hasn't scored a touchdown yet in a number of weeks. Adam Thielen does help your wide receiver core. So from the Achane side, if you're desperate for a receiver, I don't mind trading Achane for Pollard and Thielen. But if my roster doesn't need to do that trade, I'm just probably going to keep Devon Achane. And we'll read one more. We get Devonte Adams directly for Adam Thielen, which is really interesting because Adams, I noticed, was the very next player on the list. That's not what I wanted to do. He is the next most traded player in fantasy so far this week. So let's go ahead and take a look at Devonte Adams and the trades that have been involving him. And I think it is pretty evident why he would be a traded player. Numbers haven't been great, but the name recognition of Devonte Adams is obviously stupendous. And finally, he scored decently this week with 13 targets. So you could see there being a market to buy him for people that think, oh, he's back. There's probably a market of people trying to sell him that think, I've been on this roller coaster too long with Aiden O'Connell, and I want off the ride. So let's take a look at Devonte Adams' trade market and who's being moved to get him. Devonte Adams for David Montgomery is a fascinating fantasy trade that, again, you wouldn't have thought it at the beginning of the year, but I think now it actually makes a lot of sense for both sides. Team need for team need. I sort of think Montgomery is going to lose some value. He's a trade away for me this week because I think Jahmyr Gibbs is going to finally do what we thought he would do at the beginning of the year and take over more of a market share there in, I almost said Chicago, in Detroit, formerly David Montgomery of the Chicago Bears. But David Montgomery had that 75-yard touchdown run to basically save his week for fantasy. I love the trade here for the Adams guy. I think that Montgomery is a sell-high candidate for me this week based on that one play. He's going to continue to be involved. It's just not going to be like it was before. And so there are people that are going to see that stat output by Montgomery from this week and say, oh, he is still a really involved guy. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be the bulk of that. And the Lions, they frustrated the hell out of us at the beginning of the year with the way they used Gibbs. I think they're figuring it out, and I think they wanted to save him for the stretch run and like when the season means the most. He's not as big of a guy. He's not the bowling ball that Montgomery is, but now they can use both players. For me, though, it's finally going to be more of an even workload if I had to expect and project what that split would look like, and I think you're going to rather have Gibbs the rest of the way than Monty. It took longer to get there than I thought it would, but I think that's where we are. Adams and TJ Hawkins season for Justin Jefferson. I love it for the Jefferson guy, but I also love it for the, like, TJ Hawkinson and Josh Dobbs connected. Huge game on Sunday, over 30 fantasy points for Hawkins season. I'm thinking that's a fair trade for both sides. You're still invested in that Minnesota offense. Jefferson's probably going to come back this week, but like Devonte Adams could still go nuclear as well. So that's a deal where if I'm the guy getting Jefferson, maybe I have like Sam Laporta, or maybe I have Dalton Kincaid, and I feel like I don't need Hawkinson, and I'm upgrading from Adams to Jefferson. I think that's a win, but I think it's also a win for the guy that maybe didn't have a tight end, and he's getting Hawkinson while still maintaining a guy that you drafted in the first or second round in fantasy, in Devonte Adams. I think it's a good, fair trade on both sides. Let me know what you think in the comments, though, about that particular trade. That's a really interesting one. We go Devonte and Zeke for Alexander Madison and Olave. I prefer the Zeke Adams side of that, because I think I prefer Adams over Olave still. And Madison, I never care about. But that's honestly pretty fair. Like, Olave had a big week. If they have Jameis as the quarterback going forward for the Saints, I may have to retract that, because I think that gives air yard upside to Olave, who can potentially connect on some deep touchdowns. Jameis just wants to fling it, so that could actually help. But Derek Carr, we'll see what they decide to do with him, if they bench him or not. Devontae and Brees for Kenneth Walker and Travis Kelce. You're talking about heavy hitters in this trade. I think I prefer the Kelce side. Kelce and Kenneth Walker. I like Brees Hall. Do I like him better than Ken Walker? I think they're pretty much similar. And if I can get the elite at a position, it's tight end, and that's Kelce. Even though there's some risk there due to age, it's similar for Adams, and you're talking about Kelce doing it at a position that's more valuable. If you guys are enjoying this content, please subscribe. I got to get the subscribers up on the channel in order to continue making great content, because right now I'm focusing mostly on my baseball channel. I'm a baseball writer that covers the Cardinals in St. Louis, and I have enough subscribers on that channel to do daily podcasts and make money from it. So we'd love to get there for this channel. That's kind of the inside baseball of what we're doing here. Subscribe if you like the fantasy content that we're bringing. Adams and Rashid Shaheed for Waddle and Najee. Oh, man. Waddle for Adams is tricky. I think Najee is enough of a startable RB2 flex over Shaheed to make me lean the Waddle side. And the upside is tremendous there for Waddle as well. He's been banged up a lot of the year. He's connected to Tua. That's an advantage over what Devonte Adams has. So I'm taking Waddle over Devonte. And I think that's where I land on that trade. We get Adams and Nico Collins for Derrick Henry and Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers has been very volatile in recent weeks. Henry has just had a really bad week. Man, this is tough. Nico Collins, I don't want to undersell him. He's been a little banged up, not quite as effective, but I still feel like he's got the upside to score for you in the playoffs with the ascendance we're seeing from C.J. Stroud. So give me Adams Collins over Henry Flowers. Yeah, because I think I'd take Adams over Flowers, and I think if you've got an RB and you can afford to trade away Henry, you're like, look, he's going to be great, but he doesn't have the same upside that he did in his prime, and he does have the downside of getting 3 points like he did this week. And if you've got two other running backs that you feel comfortable starting, I kind of like getting better at wide receiver. That's always the better position to stock up on, in my opinion, especially in PPR. Going down the list, we go Pickens and Devonte for Cooper Kupp and Tank Bigsby. And Tank Bigsby is a guy that should be rostered because if ETN goes down, Tank is probably going to have a good workload and be startable. But for now, he's just a handcuff. And so if you're the ETN owner and you made this trade to get Tank, I think it makes sense. You're going from Adams to Kupp, which is the preference for me, even though Kupp has struggled. I think when we get Stafford back, I'm going to prefer Kupp's upside to Adams, even though that target share was really impressive for Adams this week. In Pickens, I am off the stuff for good. I know that he has the potential to go off any given week, but Kenny Pickett's not very good, and Pickens is kind of a head case. I swore off George Pickens when he failed to get 2 feet down in that Thursday night game a few weeks ago. That was one of the most pathetic things I have seen from a pro wide receiver in my life. Adams and Goddard for Deontay and Kincaid. I'm taking Adams over Deontay, although that's not a guarantee. I think Deontay, good for PPR. I still prefer Adams on the upside. Goddard for Kincaid. I think I prefer Kincaid, but it's close. It's close enough that I think I'm going to take the Adams-Goddard side on that one. Adams, James Cook for Saquon and Ayuk. I think Ayuk and Adams is another pretty fair, even swap. I think there's more upside for Barkley because he's going to have more volume than James Cook, but also James Cook might be the better situation offensively because the Bills are going to move the ball more than the Giants. So that one's actually interesting too. Weigh in Twitter, if not Twitter, but YouTube comments if you guys have thoughts on Adams Cook for Barkley Ayuk. And we'll go ahead and look at one more before we return to our list of most traded players this week. Devonte Adams and DeAndre Swift for Jacobs, Stroud, and a defense. That might be a super flex trade. The defense is irrelevant to me. Jets have a fine defense, but I don't really care about that aspect of it. Yeah, it's kind of hard to judge here because if it's super flex, I feel like you're getting CJ Stroud. That's pretty good. To give up Adams without giving a receiver back is tough. Like when it was Adam Thielen, I said, well, they probably drafted him late, so I assume their receiving core is still pretty good. But if you drafted Adams, he's probably your anchor to your wide receiving core, if not your number two. And that makes it maybe more difficult to trade away Adams without getting a wide receiver back. But if you have receiver depth to do that deal, I think I would go from Swift to Jacobs. It's pretty similar. Swift in a better offense, but Jacobs certainly has the ability to go off any given week. But the Raiders are just kind of a meh offense right now. But you're talking about Adams on the other side of that trade, also being a Raider. CJ Stroud, if it's super flex, I think that's a nice get. You get a quarterback without giving one up. If it's not super flex, I'm taking the Adams Swift side. But let me know what questions you would have about trades you should make. Throw those into the YouTube comments and subscribe as well. I want to read this one because it's Adams, Fournette, and Kyler Murray for Tyreek Hill. Anytime you can get Tyreek Hill, it's the right trade. Definitely, I'd have him over Adams. Fournette is nothing in the context of this trade, and Kyler is probably somebody's second QB. Even if it's super flex, they might have stashed Kyler Murray just for this very opportunity. So the guy trading into Tyreek Hill, in my opinion, or gals play fantasy too, did a great job here, in my estimation. Let's return, though, to the most traded players of the week to continue down this list. We've talked about a couple of wide receivers so far. We're going to continue by looking down at the list. DJ Moore and Tony Pollard. DJ Moore is honestly not that interesting to me. He's not a guy that I would target too much. I do kind of want to look and see what his numbers have been just to make sure I'm not speaking out of turn here. Looking at DJ Moore, he's been just kind of meh for a month and a half. 10, 13, 9, 5, and 10. He's probably going to continue to be that. He could have a blow-up week at some point. He hasn't had his bye week yet. When Justin Fields returns, maybe that's the reason he's being traded a lot, because people think he's going to get even better with Fields back than Tyson Bagent. I'm not really too crazy about DJ Moore. And so if you want me to talk about DJ Moore trades, beg for it in the YouTube comments. But I want to talk about a few more players that I think are even more interesting that are a little lower on this list. Tony Pollard, Cooper Kupp, and Saquon Barkley are the next most traded players. And those are the three that I'm going to talk about to round out this video, because I think it's really interesting what's going on with those three players, because all three are big names, were drafted in the first couple of rounds. Kupp may have fallen in your league based on when you drafted because of his injury at the beginning of the year. But Pollard, Kupp, Barkley, big names that haven't really been producing for fantasy, and so that's why we want to look at those types of names. Do we consider them buy lows, or do we think the reason they haven't been producing is because they're going to continue to struggle in terms of production, and we shouldn't be targeting them? As always, it depends on what you're given for what you're getting. Let's take a look. Tony Pollard and Dak for Tua and Taylor. I prefer Jonathan Taylor right now to Pollard just because of the struggles in that Dallas offense for the run game. It's just not been fantasy viable. They're asking Dak Prescott to throw a lot, which is great for Dak Prescott. He's putting up points for your fantasy team, but Tua Tagovailoa is going to do the same thing. So I'm taking the Tua Taylor side over Pollard Prescott in that instance. We have another Pollard Prescott package sent for Jonathan Taylor and Rachaad White. I've got a guy in my league that has Dak, Ian, Justin Herbert. So, that's possible. If you have that situation, then sure, you're willing to trade one of those guys without getting a quarterback in return. Rachaad White has been putting up numbers the last few weeks for fantasy, just kind of voluming his way to relevancy for Tampa. Not bad. If you need two running backs, I think you did pretty well there, especially if you have a backup quarterback that can step in for Dak Prescott. Like maybe it's Josh Dobbs, and you go, hey, he's been great for a couple of weeks with the Vikings. I think he's going to continue to be great, and so we're going to run it. Maybe that's your decision, and in that case, I don't mind getting Taylor and Rachaad White for that. Pollard for Dobbs, straight up. If it's super flex, I could see it. Otherwise, I think you're selling a little bit too low on Pollard or buying a little bit too high on Joshua Dobbs. Pollard has struggled for fantasy. He's not been as explosive. I don't love the way we always said, hey, if they just gave him the ball every time, it would be so much better. Get Zeke out of there. Well, they did, and he's not been the same player. I think they're asking him to do what they did with Zeke, and he's not that kind of player. They should be asking him to do what Tony Pollard does well, and that's a flaw of the Cowboys coaching staff, in my opinion, and Mike McCarthy, but that's a whole nother matter. But my point is he's still a talented player, so I'm not going to completely sell low on him. I have Pollard on my team in my main league, and I have Pollard and Bijan Robinson as my running backs, and I'm trying to figure out what do I want to do here. I'm not trading Pollard for Jonathan Taylor necessarily unless there's something else that I'm getting for it. In this deal with Rachaad White and Dak Prescott on either side of that trade, I think that's reasonable. But I still have in my heart the notion that Pollard's a good player. Dallas is a great offense. It should work out. So when I look at Pollard for Jerome Ford or Pollard for Rachaad White here, those aren't trades I'm making personally. I'd rather have the Pollard side of that. And I understand being a little fed up with the way he's performing, but I'm just telling you what I'm going to do. Pollard, Goddard for Adams. It just depends on where you're at with your roster, but I think that's fair value if you need a receiver. And if you have two running backs that you still trust. Pollard for Bijan. I have both those guys on my team, so I couldn't get in the mindset of telling you what I would do. I think I do prefer Bijan, though, on that one. I just can't make that trade because those are my running backs. So it doesn't. I'm really trying to help myself here and see if anything jumps out at me that I should be offering. Pollard and Swift for Bijan. Oh, man, that's a little bit heftier, but I still think Bijan could. For all the frustration that we've had, what if Arthur Smith just goes, oh, yeah, he's our best player. We're going to use him in the playoffs or the fantasy playoffs. I can try to save my job. That could happen. So I don't mind that trade, but Swift has value too. Pollard for Mixon and Cortland Sutton is fine to do. Mixon is kind of in that inefficiency boat on a great offense as well, but he's doing better for fantasy than Pollard right now. So if you get Sutton as well, who made a ridiculous catch helping the Broncos to beat the Bills last night on Monday Night Football, then that's probably pretty fair too. I don't hate that. Pollard for Saquon. You take your pick. It's the same situation where both guys were highly drafted, but they're underperforming. But again, Pollard is on a better team. He's on a better offense, so it should work. It's just unfortunate that the way the Cowboys have done their scoring, it hasn't involved Tony Pollard. So great if you have Dak, but not otherwise. Barkley's case, they're not going to do much scoring. Touchdown equity is going to be low in that Giants offense. So that's kind of how I view that one. What else do we got here? Pollard, Pittman for Kamara. I think I prefer the Kamara side if I don't need Pittman in my lineup. If Pittman's on my bench, I think I prefer Kamara. But at the same time, if they put Jameson over Derek Carr, that's going to change the receiving output for Kamara, and I could see getting totally screwed on that trade if Pollard suddenly turns it on. Pollard for Puka is interesting. Pollard and Puka for Gibbs is interesting. I think those are both fair trades, and it just depends on your roster. But that's kind of what we're looking at in terms of like the level of value for these players. Let's take a look at Cooper Kupp, and then we'll do Saquon Barkley before we get out of here. Because Cooper Kupp, I mean, let's go ahead and scroll back so I can show you his numbers recently at least. They just haven't been really good, and then he had the bye week. 27, and he goes 666 in terms of fantasy points per week. The targets are still 7 or more. The yards just going down the tube. Stafford was playing hurt, and then he was not playing at all. So that's part of what has led to the struggles for Cooper Kupp. I still think he's got it. I mean, again, he showed he did against Arizona. He showed he did against Philadelphia in his first week back. It's just about the quarterback here. So I think you got to question what you're going to get from Matt Stafford, and that should lead to you deciding. But, like, are there 10 wide receivers I'd rather have than Cooper Kupp right now? Probably not. Well, shoot. What's going on here? The Yahoo thing is screwing up. I thought we'd be able to find. It says there's been 25 trades involving Cooper Kupp, but none of them are showing up. So that's Yahoo's fault. That's kind of a bummer because I really feel like there would be some interesting deals that we could come up with if I could figure out what's going on here. Give me a minute. I'll try and figure this out. For whatever reason, Yahoo glitching out on the Cooper Kupp trades. I can't find them, but we will go ahead and do Saquon Barkley before we get out of here. I'll talk real quickly about Cooper Kupp. How many wide receivers are there standalone that I would rather have than him? There's still not a lot of them. I think he's similar to Devonte Adams in that way, but I can expect Cooper Kupp's value to return with Matt Stafford in the lineup. I don't have that for Adams. So that's about the line for me, but I'm taking Kupp over Adams. Like Kupp Olave, I probably prefer Kupp. I'm not completely out on Cooper Kupp, and I think it's an interesting time to trade him. I just can't, unfortunately, show you on Yahoo what's going on because they're not showing me the trades. But let's go with Saquon Barkley for Kenneth Walker. I think I prefer Walker, better offense, and just has been more efficient. Barkley for Olave is position dependent. I think you could go either way on that one. I'm kind of stumped on that one, honestly. I think Olave probably in PPR would be my preference if I have running backs, but you may have drafted Barkley so highly that you can't afford to trade him. And Olave's got volatility to his game as well. So that's a fair fantasy trade. Barkley for Marquise Brown, I'm taking the Barkley side. Even with Kyler Murray back, I think that's a way to trade like solid, reliable for potentially a smash play if Barkley is able to figure it out, which I know is a long shot given that the Giants have Tommy DeVito at quarterback. But I still think you can find a price for Barkley, and that's a great example of a price that I would pay. You get Barkley from Mostert and Pittman. I think that's good because I think Mostert is still going to be very viable. But if I had to bet on what the next month and a half looks like, it looks like more Devon Achane than Raheem Mostert. I could be wrong about that. It only takes one play for Mostert to go bananas, but that's my preference, is to bet on Achane over Mostert. Mostert would be a trade away for me if I could get high value for him still. Barkley and DJ Moore for Jamar Chase, well done. That's how you pick up Jamar Chase. You trade a good receiver and a running back with a big name for an elite receiver who I think is going to, he might not smash, but he should. Barkley for Devon Achane is a fascinating one-for-one trade, and I think I'll take the Miami Dolphin. I'll take Achane. I believe in him fully. If you traded for him during the injury period, I think you'll do well. I really do. Barkley for Diggs, I'm taking Stephon Diggs. Barkley for Pollard is take your pick. That's kind of a tricky one. And Barkley for Kamara and Bijan is never going to happen in a real league. So congratulations to the Kamara and Bijan managers on that. I'm going to wrap things up here, though. We've gone about 30 minutes. That's all the time I have for today. Now I'm seeing Barkley and Devontae Smith, though. I think that's pretty fair. PPR, again, depends on positional need. That is going to wrap things up, though. Thank you guys for joining. Thank you guys for listening and watching. Please subscribe to the channel, and we'll have more fantasy content for you in the days and weeks to come. If you have trade questions, post them in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll talk to you next time on the Brenden Schaeffer Fantasy Football Channel. Peace.